The night was quiet, the kind of silence that only comes when the wind stops moving through the trees and the stars seem to lean closer, as if listening to the earth itself. Jack sat on the old wooden porch of his house, the lantern beside him, glowing softly, and he could not believe what had just happened. Lyra had said yes, not in the way humans said it with rings and ceremonies, but in her own way. With her strange voice and her calm silver eyes, she had chosen him. For weeks he had wondered if she even saw him as anything more than a passing stranger, a curious man from Earth who happened to cross paths with her. And yet tonight, under the moon's cold light, she had touched his hand and whispered words. That changed everything. "You have won my heart," she said, and for a long moment Jack felt like the universe itself had opened for him. But even as the warmth of her words sank into him, there had been something else in her gaze, something hidden, something heavy. Lyra's eyes never shone with the same freedom a human woman's might after such a confession. They carried weight, the kind of weight that comes with secrets too large to share. Jack noticed it, but his heart was too full to question it. Had dreamed of this moment for months, maybe even longer. The first time he saw her walking along the tree line, silent as a shadow, he knew she was different. Not just her strange beauty, the way her dark hair shimmered with strands of blue when starlight touched it, or how her skin seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. No, it was the way she moved, as if she belonged to another world, and this one was just a temporary stop. Tonight should have been perfect. And yet, as she leaned closer and rested her head on his shoulder, she whispered something else, words so quiet he almost thought he imagined them. "But I cannot come alone." He froze at that, waiting for her to explain, but she said no. More only held him a little tighter, as if she feared he would slip away if she let go. Later, after she left and the night closed around him, Jack sat awake long after the lantern burned out. He replayed her words over and over in his head. I cannot come alone. What did she mean? Was there another? A husband? Family? Or something else entirely? His chest grew heavy with questions, but he forced himself to silence them. Once in his life, something extraordinary had happened, and he didn't want to destroy it with doubt. Morning came with a sharp chill in the air. Jack woke to the sound of footsteps outside his cabin, soft but steady, more than one pair. He grabbed his jacket and stepped onto the porch, expecting to see Lyra waiting for him. And she was there standing as still as stone, her eyes fixed on him with that same unreadable calm. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, 5 women stood in a perfect line. Each of them different in height and build, but all carrying the same sharp, unearthly beauty as Lyra. Their clothes shimmered faintly, as though woven from threads that weren't meant for human hands. Their eyes glowed faintly in the morning light, each pair locking on him with the same curious, unsettling intensity. They weren't strangers. Not exactly. Jack could see the connection between them and Lyra immediately. Sisters. Lyra stepped forward, her voice as calm as ever. "Jack," she said, "I told you I could not come alone. These are my sisters. Where I go, they go, and now we are here." For a long moment, Jack just stared at them. His heart beat loud in his chest, louder than the wind moving through the trees. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He had thought last. Night was the beginning of something simpler, love's story, maybe even a new life. But as the sisters watched him with unreadable faces, he understood something was different, something larger than himself. They stepped onto his land without hesitation, moving past him as if they already belonged there. Their eyes scanned his cabin, his tools, the land stretching out behind him. One of them, taller than the rest, with sharp features, paused and turned to him. Her voice was low but steady, carrying a tone that felt like judgment. "This is where you live?" she asked, as if testing him. Jack nodded, his throat dry. The sisters exchanged glances. Speaking in a tongue Jack could not understand, strange. Flowing syllables that carried weight like stone grinding against stone. Lyra remained silent, watching him closely as though waiting to see how he would react. And in that moment, standing on his porch with 6 pairs of alien eyes fixed on him, Jack felt the truth settling over him like a shadow. He had not just won Lyra's heart, he had opened a door into something much bigger, something he could not yet name. And deep inside, a cold whisper stirred he was no longer alone, and his quiet life would never be the same again. The cabin that had once felt wide and empty now seemed much smaller, its wooden walls pressing closer with every passing hour as the sisters made themselves comfortable inside. Jack had never been a man who liked company for too long, yet here he was surrounded by 6 women whose presence filled the air with a weight he couldn't explain. Lyra moved with calm assurance, guiding her sisters through the rooms as if she had lived there forever, pointing out small details of the house as though they mattered deeply. Jack watched silently, leaning against the doorframe, trying to steady the storm building in his chest. He had thought love would bring peace, but what had arrived was something far more unsettling. The sisters didn't speak much to him, at least not in English. Instead, they conversed among themselves in that flowing, alien tongue, their voices blending like strands of a song that felt both beautiful and threatening. Sometimes the words carried soft amusement, other times sharp tension, and though Jack couldn't understand them, he felt like every conversation circled back to him. Every glance, every brief pause in their speech was directed his way, and it made his skin prickle. Lyra eventually returned to him, her silver eyes softer than her sister's piercing stares. She took his hand as if to anchor him, whispering, in a low voice, "Do not fear them. They are only cautious. They want to know the man who holds my heart." But her reassurance was not enough. Jack could feel the judgment radiating from the others. The tallest sister, the one who had spoken the day before, seemed especially watchful, her gaze scanning him as though searching for flaws hidden beneath his skin. She never smiled, never softened, only observed, and Jack could almost hear her. Silent questions. Is he worthy? Is he strong enough? Will he protect her, or will he fail? Dinner that evening was unlike any Jack had ever known. He cooked what he had: simple stew, bread, and roasted vegetables from his small garden, while the sisters sat in silence around the table, their eyes following his every movement. When he placed the bowls before them, they studied the food, with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Lyra ate first, lifting the spoon slowly to her lips, and only after she swallowed did the others follow. Jack sat across from them, chewing slowly, his nerves fraying under the weight of so many unblinking eyes. The air was thick with quiet, broken only by the clink of spoons against wood. Finally, one of the sisters spoke. She was smaller than the rest, with hair so pale it almost shimmered white. Yet, her voice was sharp, though not unkind. "This place," she said, her accent wrapping strangely around the words, "is fragile. It will not protect her." Jack stiffened. "It's me. Alive this long," he said carefully. "It's safe." But his words seemed to ripple through the group like a challenge. Several sisters exchanged quick looks, their language sparking between them in hushed tones. Lyra reached across the table and touched his hand gently, but Jack noticed she didn't argue with her sister's point. That night, sleep did not come easily. Jack lay awake in the small bedroom, while Lyra rested beside him, her breathing slow and even. Through the thin walls, he could hear the sisters moving softly, their footsteps deliberate, their voices whispering in that strange, fluid tongue. At one point, he thought he heard his own name, sharp and clear among the foreign words, followed by silence heavy enough to press against his chest. He turned onto his back, staring at the ceiling, and felt the uneasy truth tighten around him. These women weren't guests. They were guardians, protectors, or perhaps something else entirely. Lyra had come with them because she had no choice. Where she went, they followed, not out of affection, but duty. And now that duty was turning its eyes on him, morning brought little comfort. Jack stepped outside to gather water, the cold air biting at his skin, and found 2 of the sisters already outside. They weren't watching the sunrise or enjoying the forest, they were scanning the tree line, their movements sharp, alert, as though expecting something to emerge from the shadows. One carried a blade unlike any Jack had ever seen, long and curved with faint blue lines running down its edge, glowing softly as if alive. The other stood with her hands raised slightly, palms open, and faint sparks of light danced at her fingertips, like fireflies caught in invisible threads. Jack froze, his breath caught in his throat. These weren't just sisters. They were soldiers. The taller one noticed him and spoke without turning her head. "There are dangers here," she said flatly. "This place is not what it seems. You cannot see them, but they are watching." Jack frowned, gripping the bucket in his hands. "What are you talking about? This land is quiet. I've lived here for years. Nothing threatens us here." At that, the sister finally turned, her eyes like hard steel. "You are blind," she said simply, "but we are not." Her words echoed in Jack's mind as he returned to the cabin. Inside, Lyra was waiting, her expression calm but unreadable. "They see things you do not," she said softly, almost apologetically. "The forest hides more than trees. My sisters feel the danger already. That is why they came." She reached for his hand, but Jack hesitated this time. Not a fear twisted in his stomach. Not because of what lay outside, but because of what had already entered his home. He thought he had won Lyra's heart, but with it had come something he hadn't asked for: an entire world of shadows, secrets, and dangers he did not understand. And as the sisters moved through his home like silent sentinels, Jack realized something chilling. Whatever threat they sensed out there in the wilderness, it might already be coming closer. The forest was no longer the same. Jack had walked its paths for years, memorized the way the moss grew thick on the north sides of trees, knew the bends of the river and the hollowed stumps where foxes nested. But ever since the sisters had arrived, the silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was charged, waiting, like a bowstring drawn too tight. The air seemed to carry a weight, and every rustle of leaves made him turn his head too fast, expecting to see something more than just wind. One morning, while cutting wood near the tree line, he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't animal, nor wind, nor the groan of bending branches. It was low and steady, like a hum beneath the earth, faint yet impossible to ignore. Jack froze, the axe raised halfway above his head, and for a moment his heart thundered against his ribs so hard it hurt. Then he lowered the axe slowly, straining his ears. The sound faded, swallowed by silence, but the unease stayed. When he returned to the cabin, 3 of the sisters were already waiting outside, as if they had sensed it too. The tallest one, the soldier with the curved glowing blade, fixed her eyes on him. "You heard it," she said, not asking, but stating. Jack nodded, gripping the axe handle tighter. "What is it?" he demanded. "What's out there?" Pale-haired sister stepped forward, her voice sharp but calm. "The Watchers," she said simply. They moved closer. Jack's throat went dry. "Watchers," he repeated, trying to force the word into meaning. "You mean animals? Predators?" "No," the tall one answered, her tone flat as stone. "Not of this world." That night, the sisters held a silent council around the fire. Jack sat apart from them, pretending to sharpen his tools while listening to their voices in that flowing alien language. The firelight painted strange shadows across their faces, and he could see the tension in their sharp movements, in the way their eyes flicked toward the windows as though they expected something to break through the glass. Occasionally, Lyra glanced at him with a softness the others lacked, but she said nothing. Jack realized then how little control he had. His home had become a fortress without his choosing, and he was a stranger inside it. Sleep came late. Sometime deep in the night, Jack woke to a sound that chilled his bones. A whisper not inside the room, not even in the cabin, but outside in the trees. It was faint, like voices carried on the wind, but not made by wind. He slipped from the bed, careful not to wake Lyra, and moved to the window. The forest was black, the moon veiled by thick clouds. Yet he swore he saw movement shapes sliding between trees. Too tall, too smooth, too deliberate to be animals. Then one of the sisters appeared at his side, so silent he nearly cried out. Her pale eyes reflected faintly in the dark as she whispered, "You see them now." Jack swallowed hard, his skin cold. "What are they?" he asked. "Hunters," she replied softly. "They follow wherever we go. We thought to lose them, but they have found us here." Jack's heart pounded, and for the first time he understood. This wasn't a random visit, not a harmless family intrusion. Lyra's sisters weren't just overprotective guardians. They were running from something and they had led it straight to him. The next day, as the sun rose weakly through the mist, the sisters prepared in silence. The tall one polished her blade, the smallest traced glowing symbols into the dirt. Outside the cabin, symbols that pulsed faintly before sinking into the earth. Jack could only watch, his hands restless, his mind racing. "What do you want from me?" he asked Lyra finally, his voice breaking with fear and frustration. She turned to him, her face unreadable. "Only to survive," she said softly. "To keep you alive? But if they come, Jack?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the forest, then back to him. "Must choose. If you stand with us, soar. If you run." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, and Jack realized the truth he had been denying. His quiet life was gone. He hadn't just won Lyra's heart, he had inherited her war. 3 nights after Jack first saw their shifting shapes among, the trees, the cabin walls, shook with a low vibration. It was not thunder, there were no storms in the sky. It was not the earth itself, this was a rhythm, deliberate and pulsing, like something vast moving just beyond the tree line. Jack shot upright from the cot, his heart slamming in his chest, and within moments the sisters were already awake. Their glowing eyes pierced the dark like cold lanterns. The tall one whispered a single word in their tongue, and every sister moved as if commanded by a single mind. They armed themselves quickly, blades that caught and bent the firelight, tools that hummed when touched, strange crystalline rods that seemed carved from frozen lightning. Jack stood frozen, barefoot, watching them transform from house guests into warriors. Lyra reached for him at last, her hand catching his wrist with a strength that surprised him. "Stay close," she said, her voice low but urgent. "They will test the walls tonight." The phrase made his stomach clench. Test the walls, as if the cabin was not wood and nails, but a line between 2 worlds. He wanted to ask a dozen questions, to demand the truth of who was hunting them, but there was no time. Already outside, the forest stirred. The whispers began again, closer this time. Dozens of voices layered together, weaving in and out of one another, forming no language Jack could understand, but still pressing against his mind like fingers against glass. He covered his ears instinctively, but the sound slipped inside anyway. A hiss that coiled in his skull. His knees buckled. Lyra steadied him, pulling him against her shoulder. "Do not listen," she whispered fiercely. "They speak to break you." And then the first strike came. Something slammed against the outer wall, hard enough to make dust shake from the rafters. Hard enough that Jack staggered. Another blow landed on the opposite side, then another. Each hit a thunderclap. The cabin groaned but held, the sisters' symbols glowing faintly across its logs like protective runes. The smallest sister stood in the center of the floor, chanting, her hands raised as if holding invisible pillars. Jack, trembling, forced himself to the window. Their breath caught in his throat. They were tall. Too tall, thin, like shadows stretched too far, with arms that bent at impossible angles. Their faces, or what should have been faces, were smooth plains of shifting gray, featureless, yet somehow watching. The shapes moved with a glide, not a walk, like puppets strung on invisible wires. And when they leaned closer to the cabin, the whispers grew louder, needles stabbing through Jack's thoughts. He stumbled back, choking on fear. "God," he whispered. "What are they?" Lyra's eyes flicked toward him, glowing pale in the firelight. "Not gods," she said grimly. "The ones who made us." The room went cold. The words rattled inside Jack's skull. "Made us." Stared at her, unable to form words. The tall sister slashed her glowing blade across the air, breaking his shock. "Enough talk," she barked. "They are here." The wall shook again, harder this time, and cracks split across the wooden beams. Jack's cabin, his safe place, his home, was being torn apart by something he could not understand, yet somehow he was no longer the master of it. This was their battleground now, as the first gray figure forced its way through the wall. The sisters moved as one. Light exploded inside the cabin, steel meeting shadows, sparks and alien screams filling the air. Jack ducked low, shielding his head, his world reduced to chaos and fire. He had thought he had won Lyra's heart, but now he saw the truth. Her heart came with chains of history, enemies older than Earth, and battles that would not let him go. And as the fight raged around him, one terrifying thought gripped him tighter than any whisper outside. What if the sisters had not come to his cabin for safety at all, but to use him as bait? The cabin was no longer a cabin. It was a fortress under siege, every board groaning, every stone in the hearth trembling as the attackers pushed harder. The sisters moved like a storm, silent, precise, deadly. Their weapons tore through the air, carving light into the shadows that slipped inside. But for every gray figure they cut down, to more pressed forward, spoiling their maddening chorus. Jack huddled behind the overturned table, his breath fast and ragged. He had built this place with his own hands, log by log, nail by nail. It was supposed to be his peace, his retreat, his home. And now it was a battlefield crawling with creatures that should not exist. A blade of shadow slammed down where his head had been a heartbeat before. He rolled instinctively, scrambling on the floorboards, and felt his hand close around the iron poker from the fireplace. His mind screamed that it was useless. What was iron against things like this? But his body didn't listen. He gripped it tight, his knuckles white. Lyra's voice cut through the noise. Jack. He turned just in time to see one of the creatures slip past the tall sister's guard. It lunged, its featureless head stretching toward Lyra, its whispers drilling into Jack's skull. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He charged. The poker struck with a sound like cracking glass. The shadow reeled back, a high, inhuman shriek ripping through the air. For the first time since the siege began, silence fell brief. Fragile silence as every creature seemed to pause, their smooth faces turning toward him. Jack's chest heaved. The poker glowed faintly, lines of silver spreading along its length, like veins of fire. He stared at it in shock, then at Lyra, who was frozen with wide, unreadable eyes. "You touched it," she whispered. Before Jack could ask what she meant, the gray thing surged all at once. The room dissolved into violence. The sisters screamed words he didn't understand, their blades moving faster, their voices rising to match the roar of the storm outside. Jack swung again, the poker blazing brighter with each strike. Where it connected, the creatures faltered, their whispers breaking into shatters of sound. The weapon wasn't iron anymore, it was something else, something alive in his grip. The tall sister threw him a glance between strikes, her face unreadable. "He carries the spark," she spat, as if accusing Lyra. Lyra's expression hardened, her voice low but firm. "I told you." The smallest sister cried out, her chant breaking as a figure's claws raked across her arm. Blood silver and glowing splattered across the floorboards. Jack didn't think. He lunged, driving the poker through the attacker's chest. The thing dissolved into smoke, vanishing like a nightmare at dawn. Silence fell again. The whispers retreated, fading into the trees. The walls still stood, barely, but the cabin reeked of smoke and alien blood. The sisters stood in a loose circle, breathing hard, their weapons dimming. Jack leaned against the wall, trembling, his hands raw from gripping the poker. His chest rose and fell like a hammer. "What?" he rasped. "Was that?" Lyra stepped toward him, her face soft in the fire's glow, though her eyes still carried the storm. She touched his shoulder gently, but her words were heavy. "They wanted to test us," she said, "and now they know the truth." Jack swallowed. "The truth." Lyra met his gaze. "That you are one of us." The fire popped in the silence that followed. Jack shook his head slowly, disbelief choking him. One of them. No, he was just a man, a builder, someone who wanted to live quietly in the woods. And yet the poker still glowed faintly in his grip, pulsing like a heartbeat. Sisters exchanged looks, their faces dark with meaning. Jack felt the ground tilt under him. Whatever game this was, whatever bloodline or curse they spoke of, it had already begun to swallow him. Outside, far in the distance, the whispers rose again, not retreating after all, but gathering, stronger, louder, and for the first time, Jack understood. The fight at the cabin was not the war. It was only the opening move. All night the whispers swelled like a tide rising from the trees, circling closer and closer to the cabin that no longer felt like a cabin at all. Jack sat by the fire, the poker across his knees, his knuckles still, aching from the last fight. The sisters did not rest either. They moved like restless spirits, sharpening blades that never dulled. Speaking in hushed tones that stopped whenever his eyes found them, he knew. They were hiding something. When dawn finally broke, it brought no warmth. The sunlight was pale, thin, like it had been drained before touching the earth. The gray figures waited at the tree line, countless now, a shifting wall of shadows.
Oh, there.
Whispers were no longer just sounds. It pressed into Jack's skull, dragging old memories to the surface, his mother's voice, his father's silence, nights of loneliness that clawed at him even now. They tried to break him before the fight began, but when his hand tightened around the poker, the whispers faltered. Lyra stepped beside him, her eyes glowing faintly. "They're afraid of you." Jack shook his head. "I'm not one of you. I don't even know what this is." "I don't need to know," Lyra said softly, almost tenderly. "You only need to choose." The tall sister approached, her blade gleaming silver. Her tone was sharp, almost cutting. "He must choose, or we all fall." The youngest looked at Jack with wide, uncertain eyes, clutching her wounded arm from the night before. "If he chooses wrong," she whispered, "he becomes one of them." Jack's blood ran cold. The forest roared to life. The shadows surged, no longer creeping, but charging, their forms solidifying into beasts and horrors that moved with inhuman hunger. The sisters raised their weapons, their voices joining in a chant that cracked the air. Jack felt the pull of it, deep and undeniable. Like it was written in his bones, the first wave hit. The tall sister was a tempest, her blade carving arcs of light that tore creatures apart before they could touch her. The youngest darted between them, fast and sharp despite her wound, striking where gaps appeared. And Lyra moved like fire itself, fierce and consuming, her eyes never leaving Jack even as she fought. "Choose," she shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. The poker burned in his hand, lines of silver racing up his arms, searing into his flesh. Jack screamed, but he did not let go. The shadows crashed into him, claws and teeth tearing at the blows, dissolved against the fire now blazing from his skin. The weapon was no longer iron. It was a blade of light, humming with power he could not understand. The gray figures recoiled. The whispers twisted into shrieks. For the first time, the sisters faltered, staring at him not as an ally, not even as a human, but as something more. Jack did not think. He moved. He cut through the swarm, each strike scattering the shadows into smoke. His roar drowned out their whispers. The sisters fell in behind him, their formation shifting, following his lead as though it had always been so. The battlefield bent around them. But then the trees split. From the darkness beyond, a figure stepped forth taller than any man, its body woven of shadow and flame, its face a void that swallowed the light. The lesser creatures bowed low, their whispers becoming one terrible voice. "You are ours," it said, the sound like stone grinding on stone. "You were marked before you were born." Jack froze, his chest heaving. The sisters went still, their weapons trembling in their hands. Lyra's voice cracked when she spoke. "This is why we came," she whispered. Jack turned, his voice raw. "You knew?" Lyra's eyes shone with a grief he couldn't name. "We didn't come to find you, Jack. We came to bring you back." The fire inside him flared, and with it came the truth. They hadn't stumbled into his life. They had led him here. Every word, every glance, every night by the fire, it had all been part of something larger. The shadow giant raised its arms. The forest shook. The final battle had begun. Jack tightened his grip on the burning blade. His voice was low, almost a growl. "Then you should have told me the truth," what he charged.